The still air over Crystal Lake was heavy, dense, like a damp old blanket suffocating the last rays of a purple twilight. A peculiar scent, a mixture of wet pine, ancient moss, and something metallic, hung in the air, almost palpable, promising not a night of stars, but one of nightmares. In the old mystery machine, which groaned with every bump in the dark dirt road, the atmosphere oscillated between curiosity and a certain apprehension. Fred, at the wheel, gripped the steering wheel with contained enthusiasm, his eyes fixed on the tree line that closed in around them. "All right, gang, here we are." Crystal Lake, famous for its legends and, well, for some pretty unpleasant incidents, apparently. Daphne, in the passenger seat, nervously ran her fingers through her auburn hair. Unpleasant incidents is an understatement, Fred. The report spoke of nocturnal screams echoing through the valley and shadows dancing among the trees, terrifying the few campers who dare to come, and the disappearances. Her voice dropped, a shiver running down her spine. Velma, meanwhile, already had her nose buried in an old map and a binder, muttering to herself. The patterns are consistent, always near the full moon, and the descriptions. A tall figure with a machete, haunting the lake shores. That sounds too familiar to be a coincidence. She adjusted her glasses, her sharp, keen eyes scanning the information. In the back seat, Scooby and Shaggy were piled on top of each other, a clumsy heap of fur and bones. Shaggy idly chewed a Scooby snack, but his eyes darted around at every twig snap outside. "Like Velma? Don't you think we should have picked a place with more pizza parlors nearby? And fewer machetes?" Scooby nodded vigorously, a guttural "roo, roo," coming from his throat, his ears down, catching every suspicious sound from the dark forest that swallowed them. A distant sound, like the squeal of a frightened pig, made the two shrink back, their fur standing on end. "This isn't a normal summer camp, guys," Fred observed, his voice grave. "This place is a magnet for the supernatural, or for someone who wants us to think so. But what's really going on in Crystal Lake? Who's behind these screams and shadows, and why do they want to keep people away, or lure them into something worse?" The mystery machine finally stopped, its headlights cutting through the darkness and revealing a rusty sign. "Welcome to Crystal Lake. Proceed with caution." The silence that followed was broken only by the cold wind whispering through the trees and the distant echo of something that could have been a scream, or just their imagination playing tricks. But one thing was for sure. The mystery of Crystal Lake had begun, and Scooby and the gang were about to dive headfirst into its murky waters. The mystery machine slowly rumbled down the dirt road, its headlights cutting through the dense darkness of Crystal Lake. The yellowish light cast dancing shadows of gnarled pine trees, which looked like skeletal claws stretched towards the night sky. A strong smell of wet earth and decaying leaves filled the air, mixed with a strange metallic odor that Daphne couldn't quite identify, but which made her wrinkle her nose. The silence was almost palpable, broken only by the gentle hum of the van's engine and the occasional creak of the suspension. Fred, his driver's cap slightly askew, exclaimed with forced optimism that couldn't mask the tension in his voice. "Well, we're here. Crystal Lake by moonlight. Exactly like in the pictures. Only more sinister in person." He stopped the van in a small clearing near an old, dilapidated guard cabin with dark windows that looked like empty eyes fixed on them. Velma, as soon as the vehicle stopped, was already out of the van, flashlight in hand, sweeping the perimeter with her glasses slightly fogged by the night's humidity. "According to old records," she began to explain, her voice somewhat muffled by the binder she clutched to her chest. "This was the caretaker's cabin for the old Camp Crystal Lake, abandoned for decades after, well, you know." She gave a meaningful glance towards the lake, whose dark surface reflected the stars in a distorted way, like evil eyes watching them. The temperature dropped rapidly, and a chill ran down Daphne's spine, who, despite her natural elegance, felt the oppressive weight of the surroundings. In the back seat, Scooby and Shaggy were piled on top of each other, a clumsy heap of fur and bones, their trembling silhouettes under the flickering light of Velma's flashlight. Shaggy, in a squeaky voice, whispered to Scooby, "Like, Scooby, don't you think we should have picked a place with more pizza parlors nearby? And fewer machetes?" Scooby let out a groan of agreement, his eyes wide as an owl hooted terrifyingly in the distance, making his fur stand on end. Fred opened the van door and jumped out, stretching, trying to ease the tension. "Come on, guys. No fear now. We're here to solve a mystery, not to run from it. Besides, you two know that where there's mystery, there's usually food to energize the detectives." He tried to sound encouraging, but even he felt the icy chill emanating from the lake and the dense forest. Daphne, with a grimace, followed him, her heels sinking slightly into the damp earth. "Easy for you to say, Fred. You're not the one feeling like every tree is watching us and that the air smells like something that shouldn't be here." She pulled her jacket closer to her body, the night air beginning to feel cold and heavy. While Fred checked the condition of the cabin, tapping on the rotten wood with his flashlight, Velma explored the area with her light, illuminating the ground and the surrounding bushes. From what I could gather, reports of screams and appearances of the Machete Man began a few months ago. It coincides exactly with the increased flow of curious tourists who come for what's called macabre tourism. She made air quotes with her fingers, a slight tone of disdain in her voice. It seems someone is taking advantage of the local legend to profit, turning tragedy into a horror circus. Suddenly, Velma's flashlight stopped at a point, illuminating the ground. Interesting. Fresh footprints, and they're not ordinary hiking boots. They're large, with a peculiar sole pattern. And there aren't many of them, suggesting that whoever it is hasn't been around for long or was trying to be discreet. Scooby and Shaggy, who had just mustered the courage to get out of the van, were drawn by curiosity. Shaggy knelt beside Velma, trying to decipher the marks on the muddy ground. Like Velma, it looks like a giant foot, but it's not Yeti. Is it Bigfoot who plays hockey and wears work boots? Scooby sniffed the footprints with his sensitive nostrils and let out a low bark, more a whimper of dread than a normal bark. Suddenly, a loud dragging sound echoed from the forest, like something heavy being dragged over broken branches, followed by a metallic sound that seemed like a blade being sharpened. The sound was followed by a sharp, muffled scream, which made all the hairs on Daphne's arms stand on end and even made Fred freeze. Fred, who was inspecting a broken window of the cabin, turned abruptly, his expression of curiosity transforming into high alert. What was that? It sounded like a human scream. He pulled out his flashlight and pointed it towards the sound, but the darkness was impenetrable, only revealing the oppressive density of the trees. Scooby and Shaggy, in a synchronized movement of pure panic, jumped into the van, slamming the door shut with a bang. Dash, run! Run! Scooby barked from inside, muffled, while Shaggy screamed, "I told you we should have gone for pizza, Scooby. Now we're going to be human sandwiches." Daphne felt a chill run down her spine. That didn't sound like an animal, Fred. It sounded human and terrified. Velma, despite the apprehension clutching her chest, was focused on the footprints, which seemed to lead directly into the heart of the forest, becoming clearer and more hurried. The footprints continue, and they seem more hurried now, as if their owner was fleeing or pursuing something. Tension hung in the air like a cloud of smoke, a dark premonition that the mystery of Crystal Lake was much more real and dangerous than they had expected. Fred, with a determined look, turned on his flashlight and pointed it into the dark forest. "Well, guys, it seems our first clue leads us straight into the lion's den. Or, in this case, into the depths of the lake. Let's follow these footprints and hope we don't meet their owner with a machete in hand." The cold wind blew again, and a new scream, closer and more desperate, cut through the night, sealing the gang's fate in Crystal Lake. The sound of the scream still echoed in the forest, sending shivers down Daphne's spine. Fred, flashlight in hand, was already ahead, his steps firm despite the darkness, following the unusual footprints Velma had discovered. "Come on, guys. The faster we find the source of that noise, the faster we can help whoever is in trouble." His voice was steady, but Velma, with her keen perception, noticed a slight tremor in his hands as he held the flashlight, betraying his own apprehension. Scooby and Shaggy, overcoming their initial panic with the implicit promise that, somehow, food would be involved in the process, now moved slowly behind the group, their eyes wide, sniffing the air and trees with apprehension. Every shadow seemed to transform into a monster, and every rustle of leaves was a menacing step. Velma, meanwhile, was completely immersed in the investigation. She knelt every few meters, examining the ground with a meticulous gaze. The footprints are inconsistent. Sometimes they appear shallow, as if the person was just walking, and then suddenly they become deeper, as if running or dragging something heavy. And the sole pattern? It's very similar to some heavy-duty work boots, but with irregular wear, almost as if the heel was worn down in a specific way. She muttered to herself, jotting down observations in a small notebook she carried with her for all investigations, like a mystery diary. This suggests a clumsy gait, or perhaps someone not accustomed to this type of footwear. Very strange for an experienced predator. Daphne, who was more attentive to the surroundings, with her keen eye for fashion and style details, pointed to a broken bush by the trail. "Look, that doesn't look natural. It looks like something was dragged through here, and something's glinting in the dirt." She cautiously approached and, with the tip of her shoe, stirred the soil, revealing a small piece of plaid fabric, vibrant red and black, caught on a branch. It's a piece of flannel. It looks new, almost without wear marks, which is unusual for something that would be in a forest for a long time. She extended the fabric to Velma, who carefully took it, inspecting it under the flashlight with the precision of a forensic scientist. Interesting. Synthetic fiber, low cost, and the color. Quite bright for someone who wants to go unnoticed in a dark forest, don't you think? Velma frowned, her brain working at full speed, connecting the small pieces of the puzzle. This reminds me of a case where a supposed werewolf was wearing a fake fur coat from a bazaar. There's always a detail that doesn't fit the horror story, an anomaly that leads us to the truth. Meanwhile, Scooby and Shaggy, who had just mustered the courage to get out of the van, were examining an old rusty trash can near a gnarled tree. Scooby sniffed the inside with his curious nostrils and, with an excited bark, pulled out a crumpled sandwich wrapper. Roo-rah! He handed it to Shaggy, who inspected the greasy paper. Like, it's from a cheese and ham sandwich. And it still has crumbs. But who would eat a cheese and ham sandwich in the middle of a haunted forest after, scaring people? Shaggy nibbled the remaining crumbs, a ray of gastronomic hope appearing in his eyes, even amidst the dread. Suddenly, a loud, terrifying squeal echoed from behind the trash can, sending a shiver down Shaggy's spine. The two friends screamed in unison, crumbs flying, and ran towards the rest of the group, colliding with Fred, who almost fell to the ground. "What now, you two? Are you trying to knock me over?" Fred asked, trying to maintain his composure and leadership pose. Shaggy, panting, pointed a trembling finger at the trash can. Like Fred, there was a weird critter in there, with red eyes and it squealed. It looked like a little demon. Scooby nodded frantically, hiding behind Fred's legs, only his wide eyes peeking out. "Roo! Roo! Stinky monster!" Fred, Velma, and Daphne cautiously approached the trash can. Upon inspection, Velma pointed to a small furry figure hiding in the shadows, its eyes shining under the flashlight. "It's just a skunk, Shaggy. And it seemed more scared of you two than you were of it. You must have interrupted its dinner." The group moved on, the path becoming steeper and the metallic smell in the air intensifying, almost suffocating. Fred, who always had a plan in mind, began to mentally map the area, visualizing the topography and possible hiding places. If the person is trying to scare campers, they'd need a vantage point. And maybe a place to hide? A base of operations to prepare their scares. We need to find a hiding spot or some kind of operations base? He looked at Velma, whose eyes were fixed on the old map in her hands. Velma, can you predict where these footprints are leading us based on your observations and the camp records? Velma adjusted her glasses, her eyes fixed on the map and compass. Well, if my theory is correct, and considering the direction and the steep terrain, they seem to be leading us to the old caretaker's cabin on the eastern shore of the lake. It's isolated, dilapidated, and has a privileged view of the entire area. Ideal for someone who wants to observe and scare without being easily noticed. It's the perfect hideout for a theatrical villain. Suddenly, a distinct sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the trees, much closer than before, making the ground vibrate slightly. A tall, dark figure emerged from the shadows, brandishing what looked like a gleaming machete, which caught the faint moonlight, reflecting it ominously. The figure's eyes glowed a reddish hue, and it seemed to move with a deliberate, almost robotic slowness, which was more terrifying than a frantic run. It was Jason, or at least, the figure they expected to encounter, but one that seemed to have stepped out of a nightmare. Scooby and Shaggy, without thinking twice, clung to Fred, their screams echoing through the forest, terrified. Daphne gasped in shock, and even Velma took a step back, though her eyes were fixed on the figure, trying to catch every detail, every anomaly. The machete swung in the air with a cutting sound, and the figure began to approach, step by step, without making a sound, except for the dragging of its heavy boots. The surprise and terror were palpable, and Scooby and the gang realized that this mystery would be much more dangerous than they had imagined. Daphne's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drum against her ribs. The figure of Jason, or whatever it was, slowly approached, the machete gleaming under the faint moonlight and the shadows of the gnarled trees, seemingly taking on a life of its own. The forest silence was broken only by the dragging footsteps and the crunch of branches underfoot, a sound that seemed amplified by fear. "Run! To the van!" "Now!" Fred yelled, grabbing Daphne's arm and pushing Scooby and Shaggy, who were still paralyzed with terror, in the opposite direction, towards a tangle of dense bushes and trees. The gang turned and bolted through the dark forest, branches whipping at their faces, their stumbles cushioned by the pure adrenaline coursing through their veins. Velma, even running with surprising agility for someone usually buried in books, kept her gaze fixed on the terrifying figure pursuing them. He's big, very big, and that mask. It seems to be made of a sturdy material, but it's not metal. It's some kind of hardened plastic. She gasped, trying to process the image as they fled, noting every anomalous detail. The sound of heavy footsteps behind them seemed to be closing in, and the rhythmic thud of the machete against the trees, as if clearing a path, broke the silence of the chase, making it even more terrifying. Scooby and Shaggy, running ahead, seemed to have found a new speed, propelled by fear, looking like blurs. ROO-ROO. He's gonna get us. He's gonna get us. Scooby squealed, his eyes wide with dread. Shaggy, even faster, screamed, "I'm never eating cheese and ham sandwiches in the forest again. Never. I swear. Never again." They squeezed through the trees, crossing a shallow stream, their boots sinking into the cold, slippery mud. Fred, with his knack for traps and hiding spots, noticed a clearing ahead, slightly elevated and with dense vegetation. "This way. Maybe we can hide there. The vegetation is denser. It might camouflage us." They threw themselves into the thick foliage of the clearing, panting, trying to control their breathing, which sounded like bellows. The figure of Jason, with its menacing slowness, passed by the trail they had left, not stopping, continuing to move with its threatening deliberation, like a predator who knows its prey cannot go far. They watched in silence as the silhouette disappeared into the darkness, the sound of footsteps gradually fading, leaving only the sound of their own pounding hearts. "Phew!" Shaggy exhaled, his body trembling like jelly. "That was a close one. I almost turned into, like, human shish kebab for a scary barbecue." Scooby nodded, exhausted, and collapsed to the ground, looking like a fur rug. Daphne tried to calm her rapidly beating heart, massaging her temples. "I never thought we'd have to run from something like that. It seems the legend is quite real, or at least someone is working very hard to make it seem so." Velma, however, was thinking a mile a minute, processing every detail of the apparition, every inconsistency. "Wait a minute. Something's off." He moved in a very specific way, almost as if following a script. And the machete. It didn't seem heavy enough to be solid metal. It was too reflective. It shone too much under the faint light. I don't know, but something doesn't fit. Something tells me we're dealing with a very elaborate staging. She stood up, examining the trail the figure had left behind. There were some marks on the ground, as if something had been dragged for a brief moment, something that wasn't a footprint. Fred, who had recomposed himself and was back in his group leader mode, began to inspect the clearing with a critical eye. "I agree with Velma. There's something very theatrical about all this. Exaggerated screams that seem to come from afar, a figure that moves slowly, almost posing for a picture. It seems he wants to be seen, but also wants to scare in a controlled way. What kind of professional scare does that, unless he's being paid for it?" He pointed to a patch of grass that looked slightly mad. "And look at this. There's a strange smell here. Something chemical. Velma, can you identify it?" Velma approached and sniffed the air, her nose wrinkling, as if she was smelling something unpleasant. "It's naphthalene. And maybe a little spray paint, like the kind used for graffiti. Very strange for an untouched forest. And there's a small mark here on the tree. A tiny paint mark, almost invisible, but it's there. Someone marked this tree as a reference point." She rubbed her finger on the mark and sniffed it again. "Yes, spray paint. Used to mark the path, perhaps. Or to indicate a specific performance spot." Daphne, who was further away, searching the denser bush with her keen eye, found something surprising. "Guys, look at this." She pulled out a small device similar to a walkie-talkie that was hidden under some dry leaves. It was on, and it's still warm, as if it had been used recently. Someone dropped it or hid it here in a hurry. Velma took the walkie-talkie, her eyes gleaming with the excitement of discovery, as if she had found a treasure. "Great job, Daphne. This is crucial evidence." She examined it closely, turning it over in her hands. "It's an old model, but it works perfectly, and it has a fixed channel. That means he was communicating with someone, that he's not a lone wolf." Fred smiled determinedly, the air of mystery beginning to dissipate, giving way to the excitement of the hunt. "This is even better. If he's communicating, it means he's not alone. And if he's not alone, he's probably not a supernatural monster who doesn't need help or coordination. He's human. But what if it's a monster who uses walkie-talkies to call its mom?" Shaggy whispered, still hiding behind Scooby, but with a trace of curiosity in his voice. Scooby merely groaned in response, his eyes fixed on the dark forest, still scared, but a little less terrified. "This proves we're dealing with an imposter," Velma concluded, adjusting her glasses on her nose, her voice full of conviction. "Someone is using the legend of Jason to scare, and, likely, profit from the macabre tourism that is formed around this lake. But why the screams? Why the obvious appearances?" She thought for a moment, then her eyes widened with a new epiphany. What if the screams are to direct people to Jason? To lead them to a point where the scarer can act? And what if the disappearances aren't of dead people, but of people who were convinced to participate in the show, or who were paid to disappear for a while? Fred slapped his hand, his face lit up by an idea. That's it. They're staging it, putting on a horror show. And the walkie-talkie must be for coordinating the scares, so everything goes according to script. We need to set a trap to catch them red-handed. We'll unmask them in their own play. He looked at the group, a glint of excitement in his eyes, his mind already scheming. I have a plan. A perfect plan to catch them in their own horror play. And hopefully we'll unmask this Jason once and for all and save Crystal Lake from becoming a haunted amusement park. The silence in the clearing was filled with the anticipation of an imminent confrontation and the promise that the truth, as always, would come to light. Night deepened over Crystal Lake, and the tension was almost as thick as the cold mist that began to rise from the lake, enveloping the trees like a ghostly shroud. Scooby and the gang were gathered around Fred, who, with a branch, was drawing an improvised map on the damp earth, his lines precise and strategic. The chosen location for the trap was an isolated area, with dense trees offering cover and a small, dilapidated abandoned cabin, far from the main trail, but with good visibility to the lake and its surroundings. All right, guys, here's the plan, and I guarantee it's Jason-proof. At least the imposter one, Fred began, his voice filled with contained enthusiasm. We're going to set up a classic Scooby-Doo trap with a Crystal Lake horror twist. The idea is to lure our Jason to a place where he can't escape and where we can unmask him once and for all, live and in full color. He pointed to the improvised map, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of trap engineering. We'll use the abandoned cabin as the central point. Velma, you'll position some motion sensors and hidden microphones around the cabin and the main trail leading to it. That way, we'll know exactly when he's approaching, and we'll have a recording of his movements and, who knows, his secret conversations. Velma nodded, already pulling some of her compact electronic devices from her backpack, like a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. I have the gadgets ready, and I can set up a small recording system to capture any sound or conversation, ensuring we don't miss anything. This Jason is going to regret underestimating detective technology. Fred continued with a conspiratorial smile. Daphne, you'll be our main bait. We'll leave you near the cabin, pretending to be lost and scared. Our Jason loves chasing victims, so he'll certainly come after you. But don't worry, you'll be safe. We'll be watching you the whole time. And, for an extra touch of creativity, how about we use one of your new makeup kits for an accident or injury effect? Something that makes him think you're easy prey. Daphne grimaced, but a glint of defiance appeared in her eyes. What? Me be the bait? And look injured too? Fred, I don't like looking helpless. That's not very glamorous. But, with a sigh, she reconsidered, realizing the importance of the mission. Okay, as long as I don't have to get really dirty. But Fred, why don't we use the walkie-talkie we found? We can send a false message, like someone's in trouble, to lure him faster, to add a sense of urgency to our trap. Fred clapped his hands, his face lighting up. Excellent idea, Daphne. Perfect. Velma, can you manipulate the walkie-talkie to send a coded message, maybe a distress call, on a channel he's probably monitoring? Something that sounds authentic, but is a trap. Velma was already manipulating the device with the dexterity of a hacker. Considering the model, it's a fixed channel, which is an advantage. I can send a generic distress signal with some pre-recorded screams to attract his attention. And if he's within a few miles, he'll definitely pick up the frequency. Fred then turned to Scooby and Shaggy, who were hidden behind a tree, only their eyes and noses showing, looking like a pair of frightened weasels. And you too. Well, you'll have the most important task of all. And I know it's a task you'll love. You'll need something to distract our Jason at the right moment. Something that makes a lot of noise, and that's edible, of course. something irresistible to anyone, even a supposed machete killer. He gave a mischievous smile, knowing he had the perfect bait for the two. Shaggy and Scooby exchanged glances. The idea of food was the only thing that would pull them out of their state of panic and back to reality. Like Fred, are you talking about a pile of giant Scooby snacks? The kind we dream about every night? Shaggy asked, his eyes gleaming with an almost religious hope. Scooby barked excitedly, wagging his tail hard. Roo-roo sandwich! Fred chuckled. Better than that, much better. How about a big sandwich with lots of cheese, sausage, ham, meatballs, and special sauce, with a rope tied to it which you'll pull at the right moment to trigger the main trap? The two friends immediately agreed, their mouths watering profusely, imagining the gastronomic delight. The trap would be simple but effective, a giant net hidden in the ground, skillfully camouflaged with dry leaves and branches, triggered by a rope tied to a giant sandwich. Jason would be lured by Daphne's distress, and Scooby and Shaggy would act as the final distraction, delivering the decisive blow. With the plan set, they began to work under the pale moonlight. Fred and Velma, with Daphne's help, camouflaged the net and sensors with surgical precision. Scooby and Shaggy, with surprising zeal, prepared the giant sandwich, almost devouring it prematurely, having to be restrained by Fred on a few occasions. The wind howled through the trees groaned like old ghosts, and the atmosphere of suspense intensified as the trap was set, every detail carefully adjusted. Velma, walkie-talkie in hand, sent the distress signal, a series of terrifying screams and noises that echoed through the forest, seeming to come from all directions. Daphne positioned herself near the cabin, her makeup simulating a scratch on her arm and a controlled expression of panic, worthy of a movie actress. Scooby and Shaggy hid in a nearby bush, with the sandwich and rope ready, their breath held, waiting for the signal. Minutes dragged on, tense and silent, each second feeling like an eternity. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind and the occasional creak of trees, which seemed to whisper ancient secrets. Suddenly, Velma's sensors went off with a sharp beep. A soft but unmistakable beep echoed in her earpiece. "He's coming! He's on the east trail," Velma whispered, her eyes fixed on the monitor screen showing moving dots. Fred braced himself, holding the rope that would trigger the net, his muscles tense. A tall, imposing figure emerged from the darkness, its hockey mask reflecting the moonlight ominously, the machete in hand, dragging it along the ground with a metallic sound. It was Jason, moving with calculated slowness. He approached the cabin, drawn by the sounds and Daphne's figure. Daphne, with a Hollywood-worthy performance, let out a desperate and convincing scream, retreating towards the cabin. Jason quickened his pace, aiming for the easy prey. "Now, Scooby and Shaggy, pull the rope," Fred whispered, his voice thick with tension. The two pulled the rope with all their might, almost falling backward. The giant sandwich was launched towards Jason with a loud thud and a delicious smell of meat and cheese. The imposter, surprised by the sudden appearance of the flying sandwich, stopped, the smell hitting his nostrils. He raised his machete, ready to cut the strange target, which looked like a gastronomic UFO. But at that exact moment, the ground beneath him gave way. The net opened, and Jason plunged into a hidden hole with a muffled scream and a dull thud, followed by a frustrated grunt and the sound of something else falling with him. Scooby and the gang looked at the hole, relieved, a collective sigh escaping their lips. Fred let out a breath. "Looks like it worked. The imposter Jason is out of commission." But before they could celebrate and unmask the villain, a strange, heavy sound came from the forest. A rustling of leaves that seemed different from the wind, more deliberate, heavier, coming from the opposite direction of the hole where the first Jason had fallen. A shiver ran down Fred's spine. Velma's eyes widened, the monitor in her hands blinking with a new reading. "Wait, The motion sensor on the back trail. It's activating again. But it's not possible. He's in the hole. Who's coming now? Doubt hung in the air, cold and terrifying. Who or what was approaching now, with even heavier footsteps and an aura of pure terror? Everyone's heart froze. A biting cold, denser than the lake mist, enveloped the gang. The sound of Velma's motion sensors echoed in a frantic, incessant beep, and a new figure, even taller, more imposing, and terrifying, emerged from the dense darkness, carrying a machete that looked absurdly real, reflecting the faint moonlight with the glint of a sharp blade. This one was different. Its movements were smoother, quieter, more predatory. There was no cheap theatricality, just the cold, relentless approach of a true hunter. It was the real Jason, or at least an even more convincing, more menacing figure, moving with murderous intent. The imposter Jason, trapped in the pit, let out a muffled scream of surprise from within the hole, while the new Jason approached, in deadly silence, seeming to completely ignore the trap and the confusion, his focus solely on the gang. Scooby-Doo, to the mystery machine. "Run!" Fred shouted, his voice loud and urgent, realizing the imminent danger. "Velma, can you give us an electronic distraction? Anything. Make noise. Make as much noise as possible." Velma, her face pale and her heart pounding, quickly manipulated her gadgets. A loud, shrill alarm, sounding like an ambulance siren mixed with a ship's horn, blared from the mystery machine, blended with a pre-recorded maniacal laugh which she had saved for emergencies. The sound, though annoying and deafening, made the new Jason hesitate for an instant, tilting his head slightly, as if processing the new auditory information. This was the crucial time the gang needed. Scooby and Shaggy were already running towards the van with impressive speed, propelled by pure terror and the promise of safety. Daphne, Fred, and Velma followed, dodging roots and branches with surprising agility, their hearts pounding a mile a minute, the cold air burning their lungs. The new Jason, however, seemed to quickly recover from the distraction and began to pursue them with slow but inexorable steps, like an unstoppable machine. The rhythmic sound of the machete dragging on the ground, as if scratching a tomb, was a chilling omen that made them accelerate even more. Daphne, running ahead of the group, her red hair fluttering, saw a small, old, rotten wooden bridge over a stream that snaked through the forest. "This way, quick! This bridge won't hold much weight. It might slow him down," she shouted, running across the bridge, which groaned and creaked under her feet, seeming about to collapse at any moment. Fred and Velma followed her with quick and careful steps. Scooby and Shaggy, in a moment of pure comical genius driven by panic, decided to go under the bridge, sliding in the mud and emerging on the other side, covered in dirt and leaves, but safe and with a relieved smile. The new Jason approached the bridge, his imposing silhouette against the darkness, the machete in hand. He hesitated for a moment, the bridge seeming too fragile for his size and weight. Fred, seizing the brief moment of hesitation, with a quick and accurate throw, hurled a large, sharp rock he had picked up along the way. The rock hit the imposter Jason, who was still struggling to get out of the hole and grumbling, making him let out a yelp of pain and surprise. This sharp sound seemed to irritate the real Jason, who, in a silent fit of rage, leaped onto the bridge, ignoring the fragility of the structure. The wood cracked, groaned, and with a deafening shriek of splintering wood, the bridge collapsed under his weight. Jason fell into the cold, dark water of the stream with a big splash, the machete slipping from his hand and sinking into the muddy depths. The gang stopped, panting, looking at the figure struggling to get up from the cold water, his hockey mask now covered in moss and algae. The impact of the fall and the cold water seemed to have stunned him for a moment. Fred, taking advantage of the opportunity that fate had given them, activated a remote control in his pocket. A loud electric motor sound blared, and a small reinforced steel cage, which had been carefully camouflaged with branches and foliage in a deeper part of the stream, dropped over the real Jason, trapping him with a metallic clang. The initial plan had worked in an unexpected way, catching the villain by surprise and immobilizing him completely. While the real Jason grumbled and tried to free himself from the cage, his growls reverberating through the stream, the other Jason, the imposter, finally managed to get out of the hole, irritated and frustrated, his wig slightly askew. You meddling kids, I'm going to give you a terrible review," he shouted, his voice high-pitched and annoyed, nothing like the guttural, terrifying sound one would expect from Jason. He tried to run towards the gang, but Daphne, who had recovered quickly and had a shrewd smile on her face, threw a fishing net that had been coiled up in a nearby tree, part of her preparation for any eventuality. The net opened in the air like a parachute, falling perfectly over the imposter, who struggled and fell to the ground, becoming completely entangled like a fish caught in its own trap. "Aha!" Fred exclaimed, satisfied, clapping his hands. "We got both of them, a bird and another. A fish. And the truth is about to be revealed." Velma approached the imposter caught in the net, her flashlight focused on his face, and with a quick, decisive movement, removed his hockey mask. Under the mask, a middle-aged man was revealed, with an irritated face, a slightly crooked nose, and a poorly placed wig that slipped to the side, revealing incipient baldness. "I knew it! It was a hoax!" Velma declared triumphantly, her detective smile at its peak. "Mr. Tiberius Blackwood, the owner of the Urban Terror Tourism Agency, aren't you? The one with more consumer complaints than satisfied customers." Blackwood, still entangled in the net, scoffed, his voice filled with resentment. Darn it! How did you find out?" "I planned every detail. I spent days practicing the scary walk." Velma smiled, adjusting her glasses on her nose, her eyes shining with the satisfaction of discovery. "Well, Blackwood, the clues were everywhere for anyone willing to see. The irregular footprints, which indicated you were wearing heavy boots but weren't used to walking in them, or that you were trying to alter your gait to appear more menacing. The bright plaid flannel piece you accidentally dropped near the cabin. A real villain would be more careful with their attire. And the walkie-talkie with the fixed channel we found near where you were supposedly scaring us, proving you had an accomplice or were communicating with someone to coordinate these scares, like a play." She continued her explanation with the confidence of a teacher giving a masterful lecture, pointing to the cage where the real Jason was, still grunting and trying to free himself, without success. And the most important thing, the presence of two Jasons. Your theatrical figure, who moved slowly, making exaggerated noises, was meant to scare. But the second Jason, this one in the cage, moves differently. He's more agile, more unpredictable, and, well, more real. He was your guinea pig, wasn't he? Your personal Jason to scare tourists even more, but who became a problem when he started getting out of control, going off script. Velma turned to Fred, her eyes gleaming with pride and satisfaction. "The smell of naphthalene and spray paint was from your Jason disguise, Blackwood. Used to make the clothes look old and the environment more sinister. And the paint mark on the tree was to mark the path you were supposed to follow, a reference point for your performance. Your hoax was to attract tourists for a terror tour, charging a fortune for authentic scares and paranormal experiences. But you didn't expect that the real Jason, or someone who truly believed himself to be Jason, would show up and complicate your plans, turning your staging into real chaos, did you?" Blackwood grumbled again, but couldn't deny it. The mystery of Crystal Lake had been solved, and the truth was stranger than any legend. Tiberius Blackwood, still tangled in the net, grumbled in frustration and back pain. His eyes, which once gleamed with the cunning of an unscrupulous businessman, were now filled with deep resentment. All right, you got me. I admit it. I was using the legend of Jason Voorhees to attract unsuspecting tourists. This place was abandoned, in ruins, but it had enormous potential for macabre tourism. A market niche I was exploiting to the fullest. I charged a fortune for each terror tour, ensuring people would have an unforgettable and terrifying experience to their very soul. He grimaced, his poorly placed wig still slipping. The screams? They were recorded, of course, and I used a portable amplifier hidden in the trees. And the machete? It was hard rubber, painted to look like metal, but light enough for me to wield without getting tired. I even had a small pulley system to make shadows move in the forest, creating the illusion of a monster approaching. Fred crossed his arms, a satisfied, victorious smile on his face. So, the tourist disappearances? And the other Jason? The one in the cage? The one who almost got us for real? Blackwood sighed, defeated, his voice losing its theatrical tone and becoming more monotone. The disappearances were part of the show, part of the immersive experience. I convinced the braver and more willing to pay tourists to participate as victims, paying them, of course, to keep the secret. They'd hide, scream at the right moments, and then reappear at the end of the tour, telling their terrifying stories to others, spreading word of mouth about the authenticity of the terror. It was all to add more credibility and mystery to the business, you see? Marketing. Pure marketing. He looked at the cage where the real Jason, a burly man with the hockey mask and torn clothes, who seemed to have serious mental issues and was completely oblivious to what was happening around him, just grunting softly, growled at the bars. And the other Jason, well, he was a homeless man I found wandering the forest. He was already a bit disturbed and seemed to have a fixation on the story of the lake and Camp Crystal Lake. I fed him, gave him clothes, and a place to stay in the abandoned cabin, and in return, he acted, so to speak. He truly believed he was Jason Voorhees. But he became uncontrollable, genuinely scaring people and ruining my planned scares, because he wouldn't follow the script. He was an asset, but also a liability. Velma adjusted her glasses on her nose, her eyes fixed on Blackwood with a serious expression. It's a sad and regrettable story, Blackwood. Exploiting a tragic legend, and even worse, a vulnerable and sick person to profit from others' fear, is unforgivable. You not only deceive people, but also put their lives at risk, and the life of this man you manipulated. Day began to break, casting a soft golden glow over the lake, which had once seemed so dark and mysterious, now appearing less menacing. The police, alerted by Fred via his detective radio, arrived shortly after, sirens cutting through the morning silence. Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, incessantly complaining about the loss of his profitable business and how police bureaucracy hindered entrepreneurs. The real Jason was taken by mental health professionals who promised to give him the care and help he needed in a safe and controlled environment. Daphne sighed, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It's good that it's all over. But it's still a bit scary that there was a real Jason around, even if he wasn't evil, just sick and confused. She shivered slightly. Scooby and Shaggy, who had already devoured the giant sandwich they used in the trap, and which surprisingly still had some delicious bites, were now more relaxed, sitting by the lake, eating Scooby snacks and watching the small fish jump. I still think a giant cheese pizza would be easier to catch than a Jason, Shaggy commented, munching loudly. Scooby barked in agreement, wagging his tail vigorously. Roo, and with olives. Fred turned to the group, a glint of adventure in his blue eyes. Well, guys, another mystery solved, and this one was particularly bloody in appearance, but not actually bloody at all. He looked at the horizon, the sun already rising in the sky. Now that Crystal Lake is safe, for now, what's next? I'm sure there are other mysteries out there, waiting for the Mystery Machine and the best detective team in the world. Blackwood, as he was being placed in the police car, turned to the gang with an ironic, almost maniacal smile, despite his handcuffs. "You may have ruined my plans this time, and I swear I'll remember you. But know one thing, legends always come back. Horror stories have a life of their own, and this lake, it has a reputation. One day, you'll see, Jason will return. And when he does, it won't be a cheap tourism agency trick or a confused vagrant. It will be the real legend." He laughed maniacally as the car door closed, the muffled sound of his laughter echoing through the valley as the patrol car drove away. Fred merely shrugged, a confident smile on his face. "Well, if he comes back, we'll be ready. Right, guys?" Scooby and Shaggy, with one last Scooby snack in their mouths and a determined look, raised their paws and arms in a silent toast, shouting in unison, "Scooby-Doo, where are you?" And with the sunrise, the mystery machine departed, leaving behind the now tranquil lake, but with the promise that somewhere, new adventures and mysteries awaited the most famous team of riddle solvers.